Part 1, Chapter 6A of The Adventures of Jimmie Dale. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please go to librivox.org. The Adventures of Jimmie Dale by Frank L. Packard. Reading by Julia Albert. Part 1, The Man in the Case. Chapter 6A, Devil's Work. A white-gloved arm, a voice, and a silvery laugh. Just that, no more. Jimmie Dale, in his favorite seat, an aisle seat some 7 or 8 rows back from the orchestra, stared at the stage, to all outward appearances absorbed in the last act of the play, inwardly quite oblivious to the fact that even a play was going on. A white-gloved arm, a voice, and a silvery laugh. The words had formed themselves into a sort of sing-song refrain that, for the last few days, had been running through his head. A strange enough guiding star to mould and dictate every action in his life. And that was all he had ever seen of her, all that he had ever heard of her, except those letters, of course, each of which had outlined the details of some affair for the Gray Seal to execute. Indeed, it seemed a great length of time now since he had heard from her even in that way, though it was not so many days ago after all. Perhaps it was the calm, as it were, that, by contrast, had given place to the strenuous months and weeks just past. The storm raised by the newspapers at the theft of old Luddy's diamonds had subsided into sporadic diatribes aimed at the police. Klein, of the Secret Service, had finally admitted defeat, and a shadow no longer skulked day and night at the entrance to the sanctuary. And Larry the Bat bore the government endorsement, so to speak, of being no more suspicious a character than that of a disreputable but harmless dope fiend of the underworld. Larry the Bat, the Gray Seal, Jimmie Dale the millionaire. What if it were ever known that that strange three were one? What if? Jimmie Dale smiled whimsically. A burst of applause echoed through the house. The orchestra was playing, the lights were on, seats banked, there was the bustle of the rising audience, the play was at an end, and, for the life of him, he could not have remembered a single line of the last act. The aisle at his elbow was already crowded with people on their way out. Jimmie Dale stooped down mechanically to reach for his hat beneath his seat, and the next instant he was standing up, staring wildly into the faces around him. It had fallen at his feet, a white envelope. Hers! It was in his hand now. Those slim, tapering, wonderfully sensitive fingers of Jimmie Dale that were an open sesame to locks and safe, subconsciously telegraphing to his mind the fact that the texture of the paper was hers. Hers! And she must be one of those around him, one of those crowding either the row of seats in front or behind, or one of those just passing in the aisle. It had fallen at his feet as he had stooped over for his hat, but from just exactly what direction he could not tell. His eyes eagerly, hungrily, critically swept face after face. Which one was hers? What irony! She, whom he would have given his life to know, for whom indeed he risked his life every hour of the 24, was close to him now, within reach, and as far removed as though 1,000 miles separated them. She was there, but he could not recognize a face that he had never seen. With an effort, he choked back the bitter, impotent laugh that rose to his lips. They were talking, laughing around him. Her voice, yes, he had once heard that, and that he would recognize again. He strained to catch, to individualize, the tone sounds that floated in a medley about him. It was useless, of course. Every effort that he had ever made to find her had been useless. She was too clever, far too clever for that. She, too, would know that he could and would recognize her voice, for he could recognize nothing else. And then, suddenly, he realized that he was attracting attention. Level stares from the woman returned his gaze, and they edged away a little from his vicinity as they passed, the escorts crowding somewhat belligerently into their places. Others, in the same row of seats as his own, were impatiently waiting to get by him. With a muttered apology, Jimmie Dale raised the seat of his chair, allowing these latter to pass him, and then, slipping the letter into his pocketbook, he snatched up his hat from the seat rack. There was still a chance. Knowing he was there, she would be on her guard. But in the lobby, among the crowd and unaware of his presence, there was the possibility that, if he could reach the entrance ahead of her, she, too, might be talking and laughing as she left the theater. Just a single word, just a tone, that was all he asked. The row of seats at whose end he stood was empty now, and, instead of stepping into the thronged aisle, he made his way across to the opposite side of the theater. Here the far aisle was less crowded, and in a minute he had gained the foyer, confident that he was now in advance of her. The next moment he was lost in a jam of people in the lobby. He moved slowly now, very slowly, allowing those behind to press by him on the way to the entrance. A babble of voices rose about him, as, tight-packed, the mass of people jostled, elbowed, and pushed good-naturedly. It was a voice now, her voice, that he was listening for, but, though it seemed that every faculty was strained and intent upon that one effort, his eyes, too, had in no degree relaxed their vigilance, and once, half grimly, half sardonically, he smiled to himself. There would be an unexpected aftermath to this exodus of expensively gowned and bejewelled women with their prosperous, well-groomed escorts. There was the Wowzer over there, sleek, dapper, squirming in and out of the throng with the agility and stealth of a cat. As Larry the Bat he had met the Wowzer many times, as indeed he had met and was acquainted with most of the elite of the underworld. The Wowzer, beyond a shadow of doubt, in his own profession stood upon a plane entirely by himself, among those qualified to speak. No one yet had ever questioned the Wowzer's claim to the distinction of being the most dexterous and finished poke-getter in the United States. The crowd thinned in the lobby, thinned down to the last few belated stragglers, who passed him as he still loitered in the entrance. And then Jimmie Dale, with a shrug of his shoulders that was a great deal more philosophical than the maddening sense of chagrin and disappointment that burned within him, stepped out to the pavement and headed down Broadway. After all, he had known it in his heart of hearts all the time. It had always been the same. It was only one more occasion added to the innumerable ones that had gone before in which she had eluded him. And now, there was the letter. Automatically he quickened his step a little. It was useless, futile, profitless, for the moment, at least, to disturb himself over his failure. There was the letter. His lips parted in a strange, half-serious, half-speculative smile. The letter, that was paramount now. What new venture did the night hold in store for him? What sudden emergency was the Gray Seal called upon to face this time? What role, unrehearsed, without warning, must he play? What story of grim, desperate rascality would the papers credit him with when daylight came? Or would they carry in screaming headlines the announcements that the Gray Seal was caged and caught at last, and in 3-inch type tell the world that the Great Seal was Jimmie Dale? A block down, he turned from Broadway, out of the theater crowds that streamed in both directions past him. The letter. Almost feverishly now he was seeking an opportunity to open and read it unobserved, an eagerness upon him that mingled exhilaration at the lure of danger with a sense of premonition that, irritably, inevitably was with him at moments such as these. It always seemed, that, with an unopened letter of hers in his possession, it was as though he were about to open a page in the book of fate, and read, as it were, a pronouncement upon himself that might mean life or death. He hurried on. People still passed by him, too many. And then a cafe, just ahead, making a corner, gave him the opportunity that he thought. Away from the entrance, on the side street, the brilliant lights from the windows shone out on a comparatively deserted pavement. There was ample light to read by, even as far away from the window as the curb, and Jimmie Dale, with an approving nod, turned the corner and walked along a few steps until opposite the farthest window. But, as he halted here at the edge of the street, he glanced quickly behind him at a man whom he had just passed. The other had paused at the corner and was staring down the street. Jimmie Dale instantly and nonchalantly produced his cigarette case, selected a cigarette, and fastidiously tapped its end on his thumb-nail. "Inspector Burton in plain clothes," he observed musingly to himself. "I wonder if it's just a fluke, or something else. We'll see." Jimmie Dale took a box of matches from his pocket. The first would not light. The second broke, and, with an exclamation of annoyance, he flung it away. The third was making a fitful effort at life, as another man emerged hastily from the cafe's side door, hurried to the corner, joined the man who was still loitering there, and both together disappeared at a rapid pace down the street. Jimmie Dale whistled softly to himself. The second man was even better known than the first. There was not a crook in New York but would sidestep landing of headquarters, and do it with amazing celebrity if he could. "Something's up, but it's not my hunt," muttered Jimmie Dale. Then, with a shrug of his shoulders, "Queer the way those headquarters chaps fascinate and give me a thrill every time I see them, even if I haven't a ghost of a reason for imagining that—" The sentence was never finished. Jimmie Dale's face was gray. The street seemed to rock about him, and he stared, like a man stricken, white to the lips, ahead of him. The letter was gone. His hand, wriggling from his empty pocket, swept away the sweat beads that were bursting from his forehead. It had come at last. The pitcher had gone once too often to the well. Numb for an instant, his brain cleared now, working with lightning speed, leaping from premise to conclusion. The crush in the theatre lobby, the pushing, the jostling, the close contact, the Wowzer, the slickest, cleverest pickpocket in the United States. For a moment he could have laughed aloud in a sort of ghastly, defiant mockery. He himself had predicted an unexpected aftermath, had he not? Aftermath? It was the end. An hour, 2 hours, and New York would be metamorphosed into a seething cauldron of humanity bubbling with the news. It seemed that he could hear the screams of the newsboy now shouting their extras. It seemed that he could see the people, roused to frenzy, swarming in excited crowds, snatching at the papers. He seemed to hear the mob's shouts swell in execration, in exultation. It seemed as though all around him had gone mad. The mystery of the Gray Seal was solved. It was Jimmie Dale, Jimmie Dale, Jimmie Dale the millionaire, the lion of society, and there was ignominy for an honored name, and shame and disaster and convict stripes and sullen penitentiary walls, or death. A felon's death. The chair. He was running now, his hands clenched at his sides, his mind, working subconsciously, urging him onward in a blind, as yet unrealized, objectless way. And then, gradually, impulse gave way to calmer reason, and he slowed his pace to a quick, less noticeable walk. The Wowzer. That was it. There was yet a chance. The Wowzer. A merciless rage, cold, deadly, settled upon him. It was the Wowzer who had stolen his pocketbook, and with it the letter. There could be no doubt of that. Well, there would be a reckoning, at least, before the end. He was in a downtown subway train now, the roar in his ears in consonance, it seemed, with the turmoil in his brain. But now, too, he was Jimmie Dale again, and, apart from the slightly outthrust jaw, the tight-closed lips, impassive, debonair, composed. There was yet a chance. As Larry the Bat, he knew every den and lair below the dead line, and he knew, too, the Wowzer's favorite hounds. There was yet a chance. Only 1 in 1,000, it was true, almost too pitiful to be depended upon, but yet a chance. The Wowzer had probably not worked alone, and he and his pal, or pals, would certainly not remain uptown either to examine or divide their spoils. They would wait until they were safe, somewhere in one of their hellholes on the east side. If he could find the Wowzer, reach the man before the letter was opened, Jimmie Dale's lips grew tighter. That was the chance. If he failed in that, Jimmie Dale's lips drooped downward in grim curves at the corners. A chance. Already the Wowzer had at least a half-hour's lead, and, worse still, there was no telling which one of a dozen places the man might have chosen to retreat to with his loot. Time passed. His mind obsessed, Jimmie Dale's physical acts were almost wholly mechanical. It was perhaps 15 minutes since he had discovered the loss of the letter, and he was walking now through the heart of the Bowery. Exactly how he had gotten there he could not have told. He had only a vague realization that, following an intuitive sense of direction, he had lost not a second of time in making his way downtown. And now he found himself hesitating at the corner of a cross street. 2 blocks east was that dark, narrow alleyway, that side door that made the entrance to the sanctuary. It would be safer, 100 times safer, to go there, change his clothes and his personality, and emerge again as Larry the Bat. Infinitely safer in that role to explore the dens of the underworld, many of them indeed unknown and undreamed of by the police themselves, than to trust himself there in well-cut, fashionable tweeds. But that would take time. Time. When, with every second, the one chance he had, desperate as that already was slipping away from him. No, what was apparently the greater risk at least held out the only hope. He went on again, his brain incessantly at work. At the worst, there was one mitigating factor in it all. He had no need to think of her. Whatever the ruin and disaster that faced him in the next few hours, she in any case was safe. There was no clue to her identity in the letter, and where he, for months on end, with even more to work upon, had failed at every turn to trace her, there was little fear that anyone else would have any better success. She was safe. As for himself, that was different. The gray seal would be referred to in the letter. There would be the outline, the data for the crime she had planned for that night, and the letter, though unaddressed, being found in his pocketbook, where cards and notes and a dozen different things among its content proclaimed him Jimmie Dale, needed no further evidence as to its ownership nor the identity of the Gray Seal. Jimmie Dale's fingers crept inside his vest and fumbled there for a moment, and a diamond stud, extracted from his shirt front, glistened sportively in the necktie that was now tucked jauntily in at one side of his shirt bosom. He had reached the Blue Dragon, one of Wowzer's usual hangouts, and, swerving from the sidewalk, entered the place. There was wild tumult within, a constant storm of applause, derision, and hilarity that was hurled from the tables around the room at the turkey-trotting, tango-writhing couples on the somewhat restricted space of the polished hardwood flooring in the center. Jimmie Dale swaggered down the room, a cigar tilted up at an angle between his teeth, his soft felt hat a little rakishly on one side of his head and well over his nose. At the end of the room, at the bar, Jimmie Dale leaned toward the barkeeper and talked out of the corner of his mouth. There were private rooms upstairs, and he jerked his head surreptitiously ceilingward. "Say, is the Wowzer up there?" he inquired in a cautious whisper. The man behind the bar, well known to Jimmie Dale as one of the Wowzer's particular pals, favored him with a blank stare. "Never heard of the guy," he announced brusquely. "What's yours?" "Gimme a mug of suds," said Jimmie Dale, reaching for a match. He puffed at his cigar, blew out the match, and, after a moment, flung the char end away, but on his hand, as, palm outward, he raised it to take his glass, the match had traced a small black cross. The barkeeper put down the beer he had just drawn, wiped his hands hurriedly, and with sudden enthusiasm thrust it across the bar. "Glad to know youse, Cole," he exclaimed. "What's the lay?" Jimmie Dale smiled. "Nix," said Jimmie Dale. "I just blew in from Chicago. Used to know the Wowzer there. He said this place was on the level, and I could always find him here. That's all." "Sure youse can," returned the barkeeper heartily. "Only he ain't here now. He beat it about 15 minutes ago. Him and Dago Jim. I guess you'll find him at Chang's. I heard him and Dago say they were goin' there. Know the place?" Jimmie Dale shook his head. "I ain't much wise to New York," he explained. "Aw, that's easy," whispered the barkeeper. "Go down to Chasm Square, and then any guy'll show youse Chang Foo's." He winked confidentially. "I guess youse won't bump yer head none gettin' around inside." Jimmie Dale nodded, grinned back, emptied his glass, and dug for a coin. "Forget it," observed the barkeeper cordially. "This is on me. Any friend of the Wowzer's get the glad hand here any time." "Thanks," said Jimmie Dale gratefully as he turned away. "So long, then. See youse later." Chang Foo's. Jimmie Dale's face set even a little harder than it had before as he swung on again down the Bowery. Yes, he knew Chang Foo's too well. Underground Chinatown, where a man's life was worth the price of an opium pill, or less. Mechanically his hand slipped into his pocket and closed over the automatic that nestled there. Once in, where he had to go, and the chances were even, just even, that was all, that he would ever get out. Again he was tempted to return to the sanctuary and make the attempt as Larry the Bat. Larry the Bat was well enough known to enter Chang Foo's unquestioned, and, but again he shook his head and went on. There was not time. The Wowzer and his pal, it was Dago Jim it seemed, had evidently been drinking and loitering their way downtown from the theatre, and he had gained that much on them. But by now they would be smugly tucked away somewhere in that maze of dens below the ground, and at that moment probably were gloating over the biggest night's howl they had ever made in their lives. And if they were, what then? Once they knew the contents of that letter, what then? Buy them off for a larger amount than the many thousands offered for the capture of the Gray Seal? Jimmie Dale gritted his teeth. That meant blackmail from them all his life, an intolerable existence, impossible, a hell on earth, the slave, at the beck and call of two of the worst criminals in New York. The moisture oozed again to Jimmie Dale's forehead. God, if he could get that letter before it was opened, before they knew! If he could only get the chance to fight for it, against any odds. Life. Life was a pitiful consideration against the alternative that faced him now. End of Part 1, Chapter 6a.